Hello, my name is Daniel Carranza Castillo. I am a freshman at San Jose State University, and today I'm going to be talking about sexually transmitted diseases or infections. Um, just a little basic facts that you should know. Sexually transmitted diseases or infections are also referred to and most commonly known as STDs or STIs. According to the National Library of Medicine, Medline Plus, there are more than 20 types of sexually transmitted diseases. Some examples of STDs include chlamydia, gonorrhea, herpes, hepatitis, and HIV/AIDS. And in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on HIV. HIV stands for human immunodeficiency virus, and it's one of the many sexually transmitted diseases. However, the difference between HIV and other STDs is that it's not curable and it's oftentimes deadly if left untreated. Um, with that being said, the virus can end with an individual's life in just a matter of months without treatment. However, individuals are able to live a normal lifespan when taking the right treatment, living a healthy life, for example, eliminating smoking, eating healthy, exercising, doing all that healthy lifestyle. It does attack the immune system, making it hard for your body to fight off infections. Um, and HIV.org states that HIV medicine reduces the amount of HIV found in your blood to the point where if you get tested, the lab test would not be able to detect the disease. Um, and then this quote right here, receiving a diagnosis of HIV can be a life-changing event, but having HIV does not mean you are going to die. Most people with HIV can live long and healthy lives if they get and stay on treatment. I found that quote very interesting, meaning which to me it means that you can live a normal lifespan just like an individual without an HIV diagnosis would. Moving on to statistics. According to the World Health Organization, approximately 38.4 million people are living with HIV globally as of the year 2021. In the year 1996, the number of HIV infections did hit its peak. For example, since 1996, infections have reduced by 54%. 32 or 3.2 million people were infected in 1996, but in the year 2021 only 1.5 million people were infected. 1.5 million is obviously still a lot of people, but we could see the dramatic decrease. We obviously see a huge decline in the number of people infected. And what does this tell us? It indicates that many of the resources available today are actually helping those in need or those who are looking to treat their HIV. Some of the contributing factors to HIV is homelessness, COVID-19 pandemic, and obviously poverty and how individuals are living in low income conditions. Homelessness is obviously people are living in unsanitary conditions. Drug addictions, for example, people inject drugs. With that being said, the current COVID-19 pandemic has impacted millions of individuals. Many people lost their jobs, many people were unemployed, ultimately leading to homelessness. Homelessness is a contributing factor to the increasing cases of HIV. Homeless people oftentimes turn to drugs such as marijuana, alcohol, but some also do inject drugs. There's a correlation, and both come hand in hand with each other. For example, just like homelessness puts individuals at risk for obtaining STDs or HIV. People who inject drugs are also prone to ending up homeless. Research does suggest that the COVID-19 world pandemic has a correlation between HIV and homelessness. Moving on to research. While I was conducting my research, I discovered that those living with HIV were more likely to get a COVID-19 diagnosis as well, and they were also more likely to get hospitalized. Minority groups are especially susceptible and at higher risk when it comes to COVID. Um, this would include pregnant women, the elderly, the younger people, or those with health conditions such as obesity and diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. Um, Researchers were able to find a correlation between patients with HIV and how COVID impacted and increased their likelihood of getting hospitalized. For example, like I mentioned, people with an HIV diagnosis had elevated COVID-19 hospitalizations, and they were also more likely to pass away. Why is this? It's because, like I mentioned previously, HIV does the human body is not able to fight off infections if you have HIV. So the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously it's an infection and it targeted the immune system primarily, so this is why there's a correlation between the two. Additionally, the COVID-19 pandemic created many obstacles for those treating their HIV because people were unable to attend their regular appointments at clinics, um, or hospitals as well, due to the restrictions and the whole social distancing thing. Because of this, research states that there might be a resurgence of HIV infections here in the United States, but it is still an unknown. Moving on to minorities and HIV. Those living in marginalized communities such as African Americans and Latinos considerably have less access to healthcare because it is of high cost and it's usually unavailable in these communities. Many of these individuals living in poverty are not able to afford the high cost of healthcare, meaning they can't treat their HIV if they do get infected. Also, men, primarily gay and bisexual men, are more likely to get infected, which is another minority group. In a study conducted by the JAMA Network Open, 2,109 out of 2,988 men were diagnosed with HIV and were also diagnosed with COVID. Studies also suggested that non-Hispanic African Americans and Hispanic individuals living with an HIV diagnosis had a higher probability of receiving COVID diagnosis. It's safe to say that HIV continues to have a very big impact on minority groups. Here in the U.S., poverty has a lot to do with it, because those with stable housing and financial stability have a lower risk of obtaining any sort of disease, not just HIV, as compared to an individual with food insecurity or an individual who is homeless. Moving on this leads me to the next issue of COVID-19 and how it increased homelessness tremendously. Ultimately, it has increased the number of HIV diagnoses here in the U.S. To begin with, homelessness can present many challenges in the life of many individuals. It means no home, no roof over one's head, no healthy meals 3 times a day, little to no clothing, no hygiene, especially now that it's getting cold. It's very hard for individuals to be living in harsh conditions, and it's not easy, especially during a pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of people obviously lost their jobs. Losing your job makes it difficult for individuals to keep up with rent, bills, you name it. Many people start turning to drugs because they can't cope with the stress or like with the obstacles. People start to drink alcohol, smoke marijuana. However, once they've built a tolerance to these drugs, they start looking for drugs that will get them that euphoric feeling they are looking for, since marijuana and alcohol can't get them to that level anymore. So they begin to inject drugs. This is very unsanitary. Studies do indicate that 8% of new HIV infections were amongst people who inject drugs. HIV has increased due to homelessness because they are more susceptible to getting sexually transmitted disease since they aren't like living in sanitary conditions, I guess. um Ways to prevent and protect. um Condoms are very, very important. Make sure to use your condoms at all times, especially if you or the other individual has not been tested. Condoms are the only way to prevent sexually transmitted infections, so make sure to stay protected and make sure to prevent any sexually transmitted infections. Also, don't engage in sexual relationships if you have not been tested. You are only putting yourself and others at risk, and it's not safe. Lastly, don't do drugs. Say no to drugs. There are other more effective and healthy ways to cope with stress of any sort, so don't turn to drugs because you think it's going to help you. Alcohol is a depressant, so it can have a great toll on your motivation and your entire life in general. If you have big goals, don't turn to drugs because it can have an impact on your entire life. Basically, if you do inject drugs, which I don't recommend, make sure to do so safely. Don't share needles with others and stuff like that. And then here are my references. um References part 2. I hope you learned something new. Thank you for your time.